was actually an event that was going to happen, a discussion that was going to happen last week. And John and I came on and we were talking, but the service we use, Restream, actually failed and the recording didn't go out anywhere. In fact, there was no recording and there was no way for us to fix it during. So we decided we're going to try this again now and see if it actually works and hopefully it stays live. What sparked the discussion last week, and that now with a few days, distance from it is even maybe more interesting, is that I had come up with it's easy to fall into habits for improvement or to keep trying or for perseverance without challenging the assumption or even asking what your assumptions are around that. So what triggered it last week was I had created an outbound email campaign, like a cold email campaign for chief marketing officers around the US. And it had achieved a 90% open rate, which is unheard of. Now, understand there are two kinds of cold outbound, especially if you're in copywriting or really marketing or sales. There's two kinds of cold outbound emails. There's the one by one by one by one method where you go and you figure out, oh, you guys went to the same college or you're from the same state or you both know so and so on LinkedIn or whatever, and you write something that's a little bit personalized to let that person know that you like looked them up at least and did a little bit of effort. And then there's cold, where other than their first name and after the word hi, there's nothing particular about them individually in the email. The first kind, the one by one by one, can have a very good open rate. By the way, someone's got their speaker on too high because I can hear an echo. But the others don't tend to do as well. In fact, the highest that I've ever achieved was a 55% open rate. So all of a sudden, here I am dealing with a 90% open rate. And my very first thought, because I've been split testing different subject lines, and this one of the three has performed so well, I immediately went to, what am I going to write now to improve that and see if I can get it to 91 or 92? And then I thought about it for a second. I said, wait a minute, what am I doing? There's diminishing returns, right? Beyond that. So if I spend an extra 3 or 4 days working out the next fantastic one, and I get it to 91%, could I really not have been doing something else to get me the 91%, or just accept 90% and work on something else that's underperforming? But we get into these habits where it's like it's always kind of better. There's always more you can do, and sometimes you need to think about maybe it's time to give up on this one. Either it's working too well, I don't need to improve it, or it's working so poorly. What do you think?
Or it's good enough.
Oh, did we lose Dr.
Wait, did we lose somebody? Did we lose John?
No.
There's just these awkward pregnant pauses, which are disaster for radio. Sorry, I'm stuck on email now.
How do you know if it's not working and you should give up?
90% is just amazing.
When did you give up?
I mean, 90% is amazing. I've only gotten like my wife's newsletter as high as maybe, I think it was around 61, 62%. But that's because we culled the email list down. I mean, we just decimated it, from people who hadn't been opening in 90 days.
Yeah.
And, but then, I'd say on average, because I send out 2 campaigns for each newsletter, the unopens, I said the regular one and then the unopens, I think on average we're around 24 to 26% open.
Yeah, that's about what
I get. 90% is it's like shoot for the
stars. And that's a newsletter. That's our people who've heard from you before. I'm talking about people who don't know me at all.
You must have had a killer headline. That's our subject
line. Killer subject line.
There you go.
I'm not even saying what it is, but it was so good. I made screenshots to say, I need to make a screenshot of this open rate because I'm never going to achieve 90% again, ever.
Did it involve stabbing someone in a shower like Psycho? No.
No, it's
that's a killer.
Low key. I'm like shocked that it performs so well, and yet it does. So if something's not working, how do you tell? I should move on and work on something else. This part of a process, a funnel, a system is just it's not worth fixing anymore. It sucks and it's going to suck. I should reinforce by working on something else where I can show success.
I'm too patient when it comes to advertising and other things like that. Like I used to, in my chiropractic practice, I used to use these different mailer coupons like Valpak and Money Mailer and all these others. And
Yeah,
I had in my head, you just be patient. Too many people pull the plug too quickly. And so I would go at least 6 months for each campaign. And there
right.
was a law of diminishing returns. I used to call it
Sure.
coupon fatigue, which is people
Right.
seeing your same offer over and over again, even if you tweaked it a little bit, and then just the response rate just would slide down to nothing over time. But in terms of email and other things like that, I mean, you have to cut your losses and run. Or if something works so incredibly well, it could be a unicorn, and you're never going to have lightning in a bottle again. And try something different as opposed to trying to duplicate the same thing.
Yeah. So, like, how do you know it's working too well and you should just give up and move on? Because, I mean, don't get me wrong, it would be awesome to hit like a 95% open rate.
Yeah, so you start talking percentages and stuff. It just reminds me of when I was 14 years old. This is just a very short story. 14 years old, in one grading period in school, in junior high school, I got 100, a score of 100 in 8 different classes.
Wow.
And I realized, and it was great and it was tragic simultaneously, because I knew, how the hell am I going to get 100% again in 8 different subjects, including things like band, wood shop, things, so stuff that and it's like an art, and one after the other, they're all coming in. I'm passing my little report card around from place to place, and I reached a point when that 100 came in there, right up in the newspaper, boom, boom, boom. It was devastating, because I thought, how am I going to top that one?
Yeah. There's nowhere to go but down, right?
How do you top perfection in one little period of time in your life, so that you move on to something else?
Right. I mean, I did have one thing occur that sort of the counterweight for that email campaign. And I should say that it wasn't an enormous email campaign with thousands of people, but it had hundreds of people and still performed that well. But I mean, the response and click-through rate was what I thought like completely average, like average, mediocre average. So I got the emails opened, but I mean, they weren't particularly successful after that. At least not on the first contact with those folks. Of course, now I have a lot. Normally, I like to follow up if I can, and it makes sense to, with a second email to folks who opened. Except in this case, it's virtually everyone that I sent the first email to
Well,
because of the high open rate. So we'll
John
see.
and I have been doing short form videos and other video stuff in a little group that we have called Strategic Video Masters. And one of the things that I have found is, in doing short form videos, you get some of them that just blow up or so. I had one that went to 44,000 views, numerous likes, another one 11,000 views and likes, and even
Right.
shares about my mother on Instagram. And then another one was 146,000 views. And I keep trying to go back there to duplicate it. What was it, the hashtags? Was it the subject material? Was it this or that? And sometimes you just can't quite deconstruct it in order to reconstruct another one of these miracle posts or emails or whatever.
Total unicorns.
Yeah, unicorn for sure.
Yeah. The subject line might be a unicorn.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
it happens. I mean, you have to think, if you've gone through and you've worked through and you've tested every element, and you're not getting any further, then it's either time to stick with what you have if it's working, or move on to the next thing.
Right.
And timing. Did it happen at the right time in the particular, so the timing is a factor.
Sure.
So this is my challenge, right? I have taken very few lessons, themes from this. I do want to know if something's working well, when do you stop trying to improve it? And if it's not working well, when do you stop bothering to improve it?
You do the Edison method, where you try 2,000 times.
Yeah.
Well, I think the other thing too, a 90% open rate, are you satisfied with that? I mean, you're always going to continue to try to do better, but at the same time, you're like, wow, that's really good. Maybe I can't do better,
so
and you just accept it.
Here's my point around that.
Yeah.
I don't think you get to be I don't think you get to, even assuming, and I will say that the first couple of tests I ran with the other subject lines only came in at about a 23% open rate. And like I said earlier, I'm used to having like 50, 55% out the gate. So I looked at that and said, that is a failure. That is a terrible, terrible failure, 23%. But I don't think you ever get to 90% open rates if you're not the kind of person who always wants to keep trying to do better.
Right.
And so if you're the kind of person who keeps trying to do better, then how do you do what you just said to do? Because You wouldn't have gotten there if you weren't the kind of person who just keeps picking at it and picking at it and picking at it.
I understand what you're saying. I think after a while, at least for me, I just kind of get that gut feel that I can't. I'm not going to not try to improve it,
Right.
but I'm also not going to be concerned about whether it really improves that much or not. Like,
Yes.
But
if I can, I can. If not, then but you're right. It's a tough one.
at the risk of being repetitive, it is the law of diminishing returns.
Yeah.
I mean, is that 2% greater or whatever worth your time, your effort, your concentration? And it may be, because maybe you can apply that to a bunch of the other ones that are at 50% and create them as 60% opens. I don't know. There's some sort of element, some magic dust in there.
That's a good point. I mean, if you were to work out the numbers on something and you find out that, hey, that 2%, wow, that could be the difference between $10,000 or $15,000 in additional revenue or something. Sometimes 2% is a big deal.
Maybe.
So, yeah.
I had a sales trainer when I was in sales, and he had a great. He sort of boiled it down, right? And he said, on any given day, there are lots of things to try to do with your time other than what you're supposed to be doing.
Mhm.
He says, in sales, it's the easiest thing in the world. You just look at whichever one of your opportunities has the closest dollar, and that's where you go today. And tomorrow you go to the closest dollar for tomorrow.
Well, how do you
Just go to the
define
closest
closest
dollar.
dollar? The easiest to close, or
The next one likeliest to close.
okay, got it.
So in my case, if the click-through and response rate is very low, but the 90% open rate is obviously super high, then the closest dollar is to improve the click-through rate and get meetings booked, and not to try to get to 91% open rate. That's honestly, if I hadn't had that lesson burned into my brain by the time the 90% open rate came into my life, then I might have continued to pick at it. But
Right.
having a theme like, okay, it's the closest dollar. The closest dollar is not to get opened by one more person out of 100. The closest dollar is to get one more person to click through and book a meeting out of
Correct.
100.
Yep. And so that's the next avenue to work on.
Yeah, so you go to the closest dollar.
The
I like
closest
that.
dollar, not the closest Benjamin,
Mm,
not the closest $100 bill.
right,
It should be just as easy to close that
right.
$100 bill as it is the $1 bill, though.
And I guess if things are, if you're tempted to keep working on something that's not doing well, the same question could apply. Like, is this the closest dollar?
Is this the closest filament to the successful light
Right.
bulb?
Is there anything else I could be working on that would basically achieve the same end result? The same closed sale, the same new newsletter subscriber, the same satisfied customer. Right? If this is just not working for me, is there something else that would get me to the same result in the same time, or the same result with the less effort, or the same result faster? I
But
guess
that's innovation requires a degree of persistence and resilience.
Yes, but this is a question that maybe, is more pertinent in American society than some other places. Because to my mind, this is all, and remember, I did not grow up here, right? So to me, American society is very much a like keep going, keep on keeping on. Right? It can always be better, it can always be improved. And it's fabulous, but it doesn't mean every single thing
Yeah.
can be improved. Now, this from the guy who said that there's always a second right answer, right? One of my themes. And there is always a second right answer. I don't try to come up with a second right answer for literally everything in my life. But for any problem that seems worth solving, there's a second right answer after you get the first right answer. So I'm guilty of this keeping on as much as anybody.
But this is the paradox. This is the cognitive dissonance that everybody goes through.
Yeah.
Depending on what
That
level.
doesn't mean we have to stay with it.
No, not at all.
No.
So maybe, is this the closest dollar? Is, not a bad question whether something's working really well or something is not working well at all. And you're trying to decide, should you keep trying to improve?
Yeah. Well,
so
deep thoughts
with Tavis. What was that guy's name?
Travis?
Travis Smiley.
No, it was a different name, but it was Saturday Night Live. Yes, deep thoughts with something. Blah, blah, blah,
something handy, wasn't
Joe
it?
Handy. Joe Handy,
There you
something like
go.
that. Handy, something like that. Okay. Man, you're really probing the
Yeah.
depths of my subconscious at this point.
Oh my.
So, but giving up, I mean, at some point, if you're just beating your head against the wall, and depending upon how much bleeding and how much bruising you're going to tolerate, you do give up. And so here's the thing: if you persist forever, you might be ignoring a potential opportunity from your creative neurons here to come up with something even far more innovative. Because
Right.
necessity is the mother of invention, or necessity is just a mother sometimes. I mean, good question.
Good question. The other thing that's worked from time to time is just putting fences around something. It's like, all right, I'm going to work on this for 2 more hours. And if I don't have a solution in the end of 2 hours, I'm just going to walk away from it and go work on something else because it's not yielding. And at some point, I'm actually wasting time and throwing away a valuable resource on something that just will not yield.
Think about that also in terms of relationships. I'm going to give this relationship 3 months. And if it doesn't last, I'm going to move on, like dating or so. Or I'm going to give this marriage 20 years. And if it doesn't work, or 10 years, or 3 years, or 6 months in Hollywood.
Right.
And then I'm going to move on if it's not working out. So I think it applies to just about anything that we get involved in, whether it's creating emails or building rapport and sustaining that.
Yeah. John, you've been super quiet today.
I'm just contemplating the question.
See, I've had a lot of coffee. I'm in good shape. I was like, rah.
Well,
I'm out of coffee, John, so you're going to have to carry it.
I know. No, but I do agree with you. I mean, there reaches a certain point, you just kind of look at, okay, where's the next place that I can improve? Where's the next place that I can improve?
Yeah. I mean, if you think about it, everything in your life is a system to some degree.
Yeah.
And there's no point, like a constraint in one part of the system is affecting everything on either side of it, right? And so at some point, like if something's not, like if something's clogging it up or stopping it, then you have to fix that enough so that the rest of the system can work. But you can get better results sometimes by just making other parts of the system better, and then things will flow through faster anyway.
Which reminds me about career choices and shifting. Like for me, 33 years as a chiropractor, basically I had enough.
Yeah.
No, I'm done with insurance. I'm done with staff management. I'm done with cranky patients. I'm done with, people complaining about copays and everything else and the overhead and the malpractice insurance and everything else. I gave up and moved into digital marketing and coaching and that type of thing. And that was one of the best decisions I've ever made. I could have stuck it out, but, then I'd be in, 35, 36 years in something that wasn't, it was almost like the Marie Kondo of careers. Does it bring you joy?
Yeah, I liked bounding. So for the last, I don't know, couple of decades, every time I started a new job, I knew on my first day what my last day in that job was going to be. I didn't tell anyone else, but I knew how long I was going to stay in that job and that I would exit. And that I would start looking for another job 6 months prior to my exit date. And once in a while, I would explain this concept. And she's like, why do you do that? And I say, well, here's how it works with jobs, because a job will consume as much of your life as you let it.
That's true.
Right. So I said, you don't know, if you don't have an exit date in your own mind of when you're moving out from this one, then it's not a sprint, it's a marathon but it's a marathon where you don't know where the finish line is. You know what happens when you're in a marathon and you don't know where the finish line is? You slow down and you start coasting.
Hit the wall.
Right. Whereas with me, it was always a sprint. I'm going to be, sometimes it would be, I wouldn't leave the company, but I would know that I was going to be in a different job in the company within a certain period. Right. And if I wasn't, then I would have exited. Right. So it was always a sprint. So I could always, put myself into it and learn as much as I can and be energetic, because I knew that like there was a ribbon and I was going to burst through it and then I was done. And I didn't have to worry about that anymore. And it worked out. I mean, that concept worked out really well for me. At one point in not the last company, but the second last company I worked for, I went in to that company knowing that the only reason I was joining that company was to be X that company. So let's just call it, it wasn't Microsoft. So I've never worked for Microsoft. So let's say it was Microsoft. I joined Microsoft knowing that the only reason I wanted to be there was so that someday and for the rest of my life, I would be ex Microsoft. And on my resume for the rest of my life, it would show that I had worked at Microsoft. That was it. So I joined this company to become X, that company, 18 months later.
So you took the jobs as resume patters? Is that what it
18 months, work really
sounds like?
hard,
18
right?
months.
And but 6 months prior to the 18 months, so 1 year anniversary, I got a career coach and I started looking for like my next thing.
Mm-hmm.
The whole point was to have that company on my resume forever.
Yeah.
Because you never stop being X something.
No.
Mhm.
You only stop being currently something, but you never stop being X something.
Unless you're good at rewriting the past.
I guess so.
Revisionist history for your career. That's interesting. Huh.
So, bounding can work. You can just go in, like you said, for marriages or whatever, right? You can put a bound on it and say, at this point, it either gets treated like it's a new decision without a sunk cost fallacy, or I just literally exit at a certain point. I stop working on this 2 hours from now. I stop working for this company 24 months after I started, whatever. You just put a bound on it. And then, a lot of the times you'll quit at the bound. Sometimes you'll say, well, it doesn't make sense right now. I'm going to extend it for another hour. I'm going to extend it for 6 more months or whatever. But bounding is really like that, and the closest dollar, which is really just a way of putting your North Star back on your priority, or what should be your priority. Between bounding and the closest dollar, it keeps you out of trouble a lot of the time. It definitely kept me out of trouble on the 90%. Otherwise, I'd still be working on trying to get 91.7% open rate. And ignoring the fact that I have just mediocre average kind of results on the click-throughs and book a meeting kind of results I was getting from those very same emails that were all being opened.
Well, there's an emotional component too, which is the fear of loss.
Yeah.
If you do give up on it, will you regret that decision? Yeah. And so I think many times we're afraid to let go of things in order to embrace something new, whatever it turns out to be. It could be a course, a project, or whatever, brand new email campaign. But it's like, okay, it's this notion that we see in society too, which is it's the status quo. We've always done it this way. And how dare you break, free of this to get a 90% open rate?
Right.
So,
all right, that's it for me today. Bounding and having a theme like the closest dollar is what's been it's what's been prompting me to give up when it's time to give up. And I'm sure it's not working perfectly, but it's keeping me out of trouble sometimes, I hope.
But it's systematic.
Yeah. All right. Any last words before we finish up for today?
Keep going until you don't want to.
Yeah, keep going till you hit a crossroads, and then turn.
Yeah, there's that fork in the road, then fork you.
All right, guys.
There you have it.
There we are for today.